Hello, class. In continuing our discussion on the Renaissance theater, we're going to speak a little bit tonight about Spain and France. One video. You have the two lectures that were sent home to you, but there'll be one short video. Spanish Renaissance theater had its roots in the Spanish theater of the Middle Ages, highly influenced by the structures of the episodic structure of many scenes within a play. They weren't neoclassic the way we ended up with Ben Jonson being neoclassic in the English Renaissance. We will start with Lope de Rueda, who wrote these kinds of plays based on the medieval traditions, and especially Lope de Vega, because we have a lot of plays of his, and he was the Shakespeare of Spain. And oddly enough, even though they existed at the same time, Lope and Shakespeare knew nothing of each other. They didn't read each other's plays, they didn't see each other's work, they didn't open up a newspaper and read a review of a rival playwright in another country. And England and Spain were constantly at war. It had to do with the Reformation, it had to do with Protestant England and Catholic Spain. The animosity between Philip II and Elizabeth I, to the point that Philip even sent the Great Spanish Armada, this huge fleet that sailed across the English Channel to invade England, but were thwarted, and English Navy and the English privateers, etc., they sort of blew the Armada out of the water. But anyway, the Spanish lost that battle. So no, they didn't. The two playwrights didn't know each other's work, and they should have, but they didn't. That's history. Anyway, and then on into Pedro Calderon. Calderon, who eventually does take on some of the neoclassic ideas of time, place, and action, etc., but not that much. Right? By the time the Renaissance sort of settled down, you might say, the end of the 1500s, early 1600s, Spanish theater ceased to develop on its own. It sort of went back to the religious ideas, and so there was no more development. We don't talk again about another great Spanish playwright till the 1930s, 20s, 30s, when we talk about Federico Garcia Lorca and his very Spanish plays, but we'll get to that when we get to those centuries. Anyway, the Spanish was responsible for bringing theater to the New World while they were conquering the people who were already there, and enslaving them and making them really second-class citizens, etc., etc., etc. They used the Jesuit priests used the theater in that old Horatian way from Horace, excuse me, Horace, but it's called Horatian, of using the theater to teach the native peoples the Spanish traditions, and most especially the Roman Catholic traditions. To this day, you go to Mexico or Guatemala or anything, there'll be huge processions of saints through the streets, etc., just like there are in Spain itself. In fact, we're coming up at the end of next week to a very interesting idea, Halloween. Not the end of next week, the end of the following week, sorry. But we're here, so we might as well talk about it. In Mexico, there is a thing called the Day of the Dead, which is November 1st. That's All Saints Day. It could be November 2nd, All Souls Day. But anyway, it's the idea of celebrating the lives of your family members who have passed on. And it's hooked into these Roman Catholic traditions as well as the native traditions that belong to the people that were already there. But I explain that a little bit in the writing, so you can look into that further if you're interested in it at all. Theater-wise, the buildings-wise, the Spanish theater again had its roots in strolling players doing performances in courtyards. Maybe not of inns like in England, but courtyards nonetheless, and setting up a stage at one end and having people even look out their windows from their apartments. Um, and the people in the courtyard themselves, so that their theater structures became long rectangular buildings with a stage at one end and galleries around, and they were called corrales. I like to think of it as corralling people into a space. So think of that to get the word if you're not familiar with the Spanish word corrales. And in the second level, well, the first level up at the back would be the carzuela. Carzuela was an area segregated in the theater for unmarried women, and maybe they're dueñas. The dueña is their chaperone, but unmarried women who went to the theater by themselves, sat in a segregated area. They were not allowed to mix with the regular audience, and especially with the young men. This is a Spanish thing, the idea of the men and the women separated. I went to a Catholic school in Brooklyn as a kid for a couple of years, where the girls went to school in another building from the boys, and the girls were taught by nuns, and the boys were taught by Jesuit brothers. So, the mixing of the sexes, that wasn't. That was frowned upon. If you were a married woman, of course, you went with your husband. You could go with your father, and as long as you had a male representative but not a boyfriend, okay? Women, unmarried women had to sit alone. And that's a little important. Women were allowed on stage. It's strange because in England it was totally the opposite. That was one of the things that were different, have been different about the two places. In France, it's totally different only because the 100 Years' War was taking place. So when you're on the continent, and Spain had nothing to do with that really, it was wars of religion, again, Protestants and Catholics and such, really fighting with each other, God, and killing and maiming and pillaging country, towns and stuff. When the people even in towns, cities, there wasn't time to do theater. There wasn't time for that. You were too busy running away from the soldiers that were invading, and also their dates. That's why if you notice the dates in the French Renaissance lecture are a good 50, 60 years later. They're 1600 dates, going to pretty much towards the end of that century, as opposed to 1500s, which we were writing about before. So the French did, by the time they started to do theater professionally, they did embrace the whole Italian idea. The unities, Aristotle's unities. Remember when we talked about, when we were talking about ancient Greek theater, I mentioned to you that the unities were going to come back to bite us, and they do. The idea of the unity of time, place, and action. The plays of especially Molière and Racine. Corneille had a problem with it. He was earlier than the other two, and he had a problem with this idea of the rules. His Le Cid is about a warrior, a Spanish hero named, he was named by the Moors El Cid, and you can't do wars without, you have to go to another place. It all can't take place in one place. It all certainly can't take place in one day. So he had problem with that. He wrote the play anyway, but it was brought up on charges in front of the Académie Française, Cardinal Richelieu's organization, and he didn't want to, the Académie Française now, not the Comédie Française. That's going to come in a second. But the Academy, which is there to uphold the rules of French language. Basically, they're the people who put out the dictionary, just like Oxford Press, the Oxford Dictionary for English. But the Academy, which still exists, is there to keep the French language pure as a language. So anyway, he wrote a treatise against the unities, or more of a defense of himself, and in the meantime saying no to this idea of unities. So he stopped writing for many years, and then he came back, and everything. The rest is all right, but he didn't really still stick to it. Molière, yeah. Now Molière is the Shakespeare of France. Still is. Molière is very, very revered in France. If you were to go onto a site called Periscope, not Periscope, but Periscope, it's a little bit of a pun, .com, .fr for France. It's an entertainment magazine. You used to be able to buy it in kiosks on the street, newsstands, a little paperback thing, came out once a week, listed all the movies, listed all the plays, listed everything that was going on in all the art galleries and museums and special shows and all of that, rock concerts, discos, all of that. Very entertainment magazine, but now it's all online. And if you go and you put in the dates, you will see that quite a few theater companies around town in Paris will be doing Molière plays because he's just their most popular playwright. And but his plays based a lot on commedia dell'arte, took the characterizations of commedia dell'arte and put them into his plays, because he was an actor as well, Molière, and he was a comic actor, which is why he writes comic plays. Like Jonson wrote comic plays in England, Molière writes only comedies. There's one tragedy called Don Juan, and that's Don Juan, or the opera version by Mozart, Don Giovanni, and it ends with Don Juan. The stage opens up and he's dragged down to hell for his sins, so it's somewhat of a tragedy. It's not done very often, and if it is, it's more as a scholarly, what do I want to say, unique situation. It's a curiosity, Don Juan by Molière. I've never seen it. I've never even really read it. I'm not interested in that. I like Molière's comedies. That's a different thing. Actually, I should read Don Juan, shouldn't I? Anyway, but that's the playwrights. And their theaters were already, as you saw in one of the YouTube things, already built with proscenium arches. See, the proscenium arch comes into Spain when Philip the Fourth, I'm trying to think, not the second, a little later, the fourth invites Cosimo Lati from Italy to come and work at the court, for the court theater. When James the First had Inigo Jones work for the court theater as court architecture, Inigo gets on a boat and goes to Italy and studies with Palladio, etc. And so he learns about the Italian scene design and idea of perspective scenery, movable, etc. And he brings those ideas back to England in the court and builds temporary proscenium arches, which eventually, like I always say, win out. We still have them all around us, proscenium arches. If you ever get to go to the theater on Broadway again, you'll see them. Your high school auditorium probably had a proscenium arch in it. And anyway, Bellotti comes to Spain and starts building this stuff. In France, it's just already there. The Hotel de Bourgogne has a proscenium arch, and the Hotel de Bourgogne, which was on the estate of the Duke of Burgundy, that's where the Bourgogne comes from, is the first permanent theater built in the continent of Europe, actually, not just France, since ancient days, since Roman days. So that's a thing you should know about too, that sort of thing. Anyway, Comédie Française. In 1680, the king, Louis XIV, takes 3 theaters: the Théâtre Illustre, the Théâtre Guénigaud, and the Théâtre de Marais. And they had the 3 main theater companies running, in Paris at the time. and he puts them together into a monopoly, and the government takes over the funding. And it is called, well, at first it was called the Comédie, the Théâtre Français, and then it becomes the Comédie Française. When you have that z ending at the end of a word, that usually means it's feminine, right? So comédie is a feminine word, where théâtre isn't. Théâtre is a masculine word, so it's le théâtre français, but it's la comédie française. Okay, a French man is français, a French woman is française. So I'm just a little French there for you. That's why you'll see it spelled a little differently too. I had a friend one time who said that French is three languages. It all depends upon if you're speaking it, reading it, or singing it. So it's a beautiful language, but it is a little difficult. Anyway, it's still going. The Comédie Française is still very much with us. It sits on the plaza. The main stage is called the Salle de Richelieu, named after the cardinal. That's why its interior is all red, because cardinals wear red. I've been lucky to have been there a couple of times in my life, and one time when I went, I actually saw a play by Racine. I'm going to show you a little bit of a program. Look at the back of this. Right? I think this is a very beautiful photograph. First of all, the blue background is stunning. The woman in her diaphanous gown is just wandering around the temple. She's talking. She's got a monologue here, a soliloquy of sorts, and see the columns of the temples. That's very neoclassic, right? Nothing cluttered, no extra kind of decor. It's simple lines, simple colors, because it's all directed at the language. She's probably going to talk for about 10 minutes in this monologue. I'm going to show you the front of it. Of course, the words are backwards. This is the front of it. Again, some actors dressed to evoke the idea of Greek. He doesn't look very Greek, but she does. But backwards, you can kind of see in this little thing here, it does say Comédie Française 1680. And the name of the play was Andromache. Andromache is based directly on Euripides' play called The Trojan Women. So here we're watching a Greek tragedy through the prism of French neoclassicism. That's interesting, right? And the neoclassicism goes pretty much through a lot of plays, even into the 20th century, modern plays. Although the comedy now doesn't, it used to just do French work. Now it does other things. Hamlet. I remember being there one time with a friend, and we decided we did not want to see Romeo and Juliet in translation in French. We wanted to see a French play at the Comédie Française. So, another picture that I like too from this program is this one. It's the same set. In fact, that close-up of that woman walking back there, you didn't see the steps, but see there are steps. That's why I said it was a temple. It could be anything. It could be I know it's a temple, but it could have been a palace of some sort. But I like the diaphanous drapes being blown gently through the columns and stuff. But it's very balanced. But we'll talk about really neoclassicism next Saturday, because that's really when we have to talk about it. This is the beginnings of it. And in France, it takes hold. Not so much in Spain or England, and definitely not Italy at the time. So, but that's the program from the Comédie Française. Anyway, I hope you understood, or now maybe have a feel better now that you're the four countries, about why I said early on that the Renaissance was the beginning of our modern world. You know, when we're talking about this time period, 1520 is only 500 years ago. 1620s and 30s with the French stuff, right, is only 400 years ago. This is a very short amount of time in history. Considering that when we started this course, We started talking about the ancient Greeks 2,500 years ago, right? 2.5 millennia to 500 BCE. This is 1500 CE, only 500 years ago. And now it's all going to come very fast, because each century that we're going to talk about next and next and next, with our little side trip to the theaters of Asia coming up as well. Then we go back a little in time, a lot, but we catch up. The more we are able to record history is the more history you have to learn. So the lists are going to get longer. That's why even with this Renaissance, if we did it all at once, it would have been a very long list. You got the new list tonight. The quiz on Saturday is only going to be about Spain and France. The lectures are about Spain and France. Look at the YouTube links. Look at the pictures. Read my prose, my writing. I hope it makes sense to you. Again, ask me anything. If you can't understand something, I'm here to further explain it. Do not be embarrassed. Nobody will know you asked me. And if you ask me a question that I think everybody should know, I will write to everybody and say, a colleague has asked me this, and I think you should know that. Not only about what you have to learn, but even procedures, further explanation about a paper. I have 2 more articles I'm going to be sending you tomorrow, Sunday, about to bring your articles up to 8, by the way. Anyway, and I'll explain why I did it. So going back to the Comédie Française, because it is funded completely by the government, that's called a national theater. England has one. It's called the National Theatre, and it didn't get organized until the 1960s. Ireland has one. The Abbey Theatre in Dublin was founded in 1908. A lot of cities in Europe have national theaters. We don't. America tried a national theater once in the 1930s during the Depression, called the Federal Theater Project. And the Federal Theater, but then they ran into some censorship problems. We do not like censorship, do we? If you do that play, we're not going to pull up our money. No. You give me the money and we do what we want to do with it. This is arts we're talking about. You don't like the play, or you think it's offensive, tell you what, don't go. You don't like a film or a movie and you find it offensive, don't go. That's all. Change the channel. Nobody told you to go to that museum. You don't have to go there. You don't like to look at pictures of naked people, painted on walls or whatever. Don't go. But don't censor it. And as an artist, never censor yourself because you're going to think you'll make more money selling more books or something. That's the books that will not be remembered in the future. But anyway, that's just me. That's just me spouting on again. Modern era. Science. That's a little graph. I'm going to try to do this way because I don't have a board to write on, right? Religion up here. The state down here. This is a time period, the Renaissance, where because of the Reformation, Christianity gets broken into many different kinds of Christianities, right? They're all basically Christianity, but the Roman Catholic Church is only one of them now. I'm not even talking about the Eastern churches, as they're called, the Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox churches. That also happened. So you have them, and you have the Roman Catholic churches, and you have Episcopalians, and Baptists, and Presbyterians, and Methodists, and Lutherans, etc., 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 Calvinists, Quakers, the Puritans. Yeah. In 1642, they come into power in the English Parliament, and they close all the theaters. And yet in 1620, a mere, 22 years earlier, they were persecuted to the point in England that they got on a boat. They went first to Amsterdam, and then they got a boat, and it was called the Mayflower, and they came to the Americas. It wasn't the United States. They landed at Plymouth Rock, that whole thing. We're about to celebrate it in a month and a half. And it's those people. Big hats, buckles on the shoes. Everything was for God. No plays, no dancing, no singing. No. See, Luther liked singing. Luther wrote hymns. Luther wrote music. So in Lutheranism, singing is a big part of it. So anyway, when that happened and the authority of the Pope kind of disappears in a lot of the countries, they had to find something else. All of a sudden, to take to fill the void of this authoritarian figure, we start to really get the divine right of kings, and that's why I push the kings at you. At the beginning of each of these episodes, you saw a photograph, a painting of a king or a queen, Elizabeth I, Philip II, and Louis XIV, right? England, Spain, and France. Not Italy, because there wasn't a country called Italy at the time. There was an area that was called Italy, but the place we call Italy now was just a series of broken up duchies and smaller city-states. Venice was its own country, and it would go to war with Florence, who was its own country, who would go to war with Pisa, or Rome itself. So the unification of Italy doesn't happen until the mid or late 19th century. Same with Germany. Theater was going on in Germany during the Renaissance, but we're not going to talk about that. Germany comes into our discussion at the end of next week, towards the end. There is something called German neoclassicism, the Weimar Republic and all that. Not Republic, excuse me. We'll get into it next week. Anyway, the thing is that right now, there was a thing in the world at the time in Europe about what it meant to be Spanish, what it meant to be French, what it meant to be English. The Renaissance embodies a concept that's called humanism, where man is the measure of all things. That's a quote by a Greek guy, actually, but they discovered that quote. So mankind becomes the center of the universe, not so much God. Right? So man is there. If you noticed in the writing, it's not religious oriented. Oh, it's mentioned God is there, blah, blah, blah. Hamlet sits there and talks about to be or not to be, that is the question, right? He talks about suicide, and what prevents it is not knowing what's on the other side. Well, if you were really into the faith, there'd be no question what's in the other side. It's heaven or hell. Right? That's it. You go to heaven, you go to hell. There's an afterlife, blah, blah, blah. But in a humanist way, Hamlet is questioning that. There was a seeking of knowledge in the Renaissance. It was a desire to know things. Marlowe's Faust sells his soul to the devil. I know I've said this probably before, but he sells his soul to the devil because he wants to know everything. Not necessarily, he just doesn't sit back and accept all the biblical information that's there, or the biblical explanations. No. We got to figure out some other way. So there's a humanist. And in the plastic arts, as they're called, sculpture and painting, you see it's the human body is the center of attention here. David, in the David and Goliath story, David by Michelangelo is there with his slingshot over his shoulder, and he's looking out what we think is the giant, right, and everything. But the statue is completely naked. It is. Victorians in the 19th century were represented with a fig leaf over certain portions. But no, when you see that statue, it is naked. Venus de Milo is naked. So, because it's all about the celebration of the human figure and the psychological part as well. And that's where the drama comes in, et cetera, et cetera. So in this way, it's very, very modern. And the state, the rise of the state. That's why we had to break this part into four states. When we did the Middle Ages lasted 1,000 years, but the authority was always the church, right? There was no reason. These passion plays and the miracle plays and the cycle plays and that whole thing was done in all the different countries. First in Latin, liturgical, and then in the language of the people, because they were the ones attending the festivals. Which brings us to economics. Economics, this is the time when theater becomes a business. And you pay to go to the theater. That's why I said that when you, again, back with the Elizabethans, that drawing that De Witt did. He was a businessman in London on business from Amsterdam, and he drew himself a picture of the stage. Why he did it, we don't know, but he did. If they had programs like this, and if he was bored enough waiting for the play to start, although there were figures on that stage, he could have been doodling in his program, making a picture. Now people take pictures. You're not supposed to do that. Don't do that. Whenever I've snuck a picture, it's usually during the curtain calls when nobody's, but not when the actors are actually up there. It's not good. It's not good. You're supposed to be paying attention to the stage anyway. So anyway, it's a business now. Greeks went to the theater for free. Romans went to the theater for free. People living during the Middle Ages went to the theater for free. They went to all those festivals, etc. And the festivals were wrapped around something religious, remember. Theater coming out of religious rituals. So if it was dedicated to Dionysus, and then to Jupiter, and then to God himself or herself, right? But not here. Not here. Independent entrepreneurs, producers started to show their face. They weren't called that, but they got the money together. They put on the show. And so Shakespeare's producer was a man named Philip Henslowe. So Henslowe says, hey, Bill, why don't you write me a new play? I'll give you 30 ducats, or crowns or whatever, euros, to write me a new play. And so he gives Will the money, and Will goes home and writes something, and then brings it to Henslowe. They rehearse it, they cast it rather, with their own company of actors who share on the profits, which is what you'll read about in the Comédie Française. That's what happens. When you're hired, even today, at the Comédie Française, you belong to them. You sign a contract. You are called a pensionnaire, and you get paid weekly or monthly or whatever it is. You can look into that. But you are a paid contract worker for them. After being there for a certain amount of time, you get elected to become a sociétaire. And a sociétaire is the society which you share the profits. Most of the profits go back to the state also, by the way. Which is why one of the articles I'm going to send you tomorrow or Monday, it has to do with the performance that's going on now at the Comédie Française. France got away from the lockdown a little too soon. I think it was too soon. I go to Paris almost every year, and I have a friend or two who live there, and it's kind of I go to all the theater I can, and concerts and all the rest of it, but I think they came back too soon, and now they're talking about putting more restrictions on. So I don't know if the Comédie Française is actually in performance now. It was last week. And they talked about distancing. And they talked about how, the article talks about how it's every other seat they sell. Probably put a ribbon or something on so that you don't sit in the middle seat. So you're a seat away from the person next to you. And all, and so but they can do that. Broadway can't do that. That was my point. Broadway is not nationalized, so nobody is picking up the bills other than selling the tickets, getting revenue from the ads, etc. Unless you're a nonprofit where the money goes back into the company and you have a little bit of money, but running a show costs thousands and thousands of dollars a week. I'm talking about like tens of thousands of dollars with everything. So you have to sell all the seats in the auditorium. You can't sell every third seat. But when you're a national theater and the government is picking up the tab, they could do that because they're not going to lose the money because they have a budget already. And when I was running the office at school, the Fine and Performing Arts office, as the office manager up until this past February, I had an argument one time with somebody in purchasing about money. And I said, but what are you talking to me about this for? And he said, what do you mean? It's too expensive. But I said, but I'm budgeted for it. It's up to me to decide how I want to spend my budget. If I want to spend my budget, if I want to take $100 to buy something, because I think we should have that, with the rest of the budget, as long as I don't go over budget by the end of the fiscal year, what difference does it make how I spend it? You're not saving any money, because if you save money on the thing, that's only going to give me more money to spend. So let me spend it the way I want to, right? So you could do that when you're budgeted, but you know that. You're barookers. We teach everybody how to do this. This whole school is a school of business. Adam Smith, 1700s, next week. But he was an economist. We start doing this now. In the Renaissance, when people started to lend money, they did banking. Why is it called a bank? Because people would meet in plazas and in squares or in buildings and conduct business in Italy on benches. And a bench is called a banco. Oh, a banquette. You can go to a fancy restaurant on, down in Fifth Avenue or something and sit in a banquette. We call it a booth. But the idea of the banquette. So we get the word bank from it. And that's Renaissance. So the whole economics of culture starts now. Creeping. Nobody woke up and said, oh, we're in the Renaissance, so better now let's make a bank. It evolves, right? So we've got religion, the state, and economics, and the last thing is science. Put science, right? So we got state, religion, state, economics, and science. But that is about the quest for knowledge. I guess I hit upon that too already. But those things are very going around and around and around, and they're intermeshed. They're meshed together, and they're interspersed, and it's a whole melange, and we come out of it. And pretty much, I think that's all I've really got to say about it. I just wanted to reiterate that this is it. Did you get that by the time you finish studying this part of European history and theatrical history? It's also about, plays are about kings and queens and all, but it's also about ordinary people. Molière's comedies are about ordinary people. Kings and queens aren't inherently funny, but ordinary people are very funny. Right? He's got a play, Monsieur Molière, that's called Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, the bourgeois gentleman, or many times it's translated as the would-be gentleman, because here's a man who has money, and now he wants to have some pedigree. He wants to buy his way into society. He wants to gain class, to rise above his bourgeois middle ground, what we call the middle class. He wants to buy his way out of it. So, and people around him know that's exactly what he's doing. So the voice teacher gets paid to teach him to sing, but he sings badly. The dance teacher gets him to dance, to teach him how to dance, courtly dances. But when he demonstrates it, he's terrible. He's terrible at all of it. When he's learning languages, he mangles the language that he's trying to learn. And it doesn't matter to his teachers, because the more he has to learn, oh, you're not quite there yet, sir. They bilk him. They bilk him out of all of his money. He's the would-be gentleman. And that's okay, because we got one in a city south of us, sitting in a big white house, and because he had money, he thought he could buy himself some class. That man has no class. Anyway, I'm editorializing, and I shouldn't be, but that's the case. That is what it is, and that that's what comedy can do. His Tartuffe, the play Tartuffe, was banned because he was poking fun at religious hypocrisy. Tartuffe is like a televangelist, standing in front of all the people saying, like, oh, God is this and God is that, and a rich man can't get through the eye of a needle, but send me your money, at the end. Until the subtitle of Tartuffe is Tartuffe or the Hypocrite. So there's a and the church didn't like that. Poor Molière got really lambasted by the church, and he didn't write either for a little while, but he came back. And also the Imaginary Invalid. It's the same thing. Molière was poking fun at doctors who find everything wrong with you. I remember I had an aunt one time. She was so funny. She said to me one time, oh, I never go to hospital. No. If you go to the hospital, they're guaranteed they will find something wrong with you, even if you have something wrong with you. It's a different way of looking at it. Well, Molière was saying that. So these doctors also bilk the guy, the imaginary invalid. Le malade imaginaire. Imaginaire is a French word meaning imaginary. So, a malade is sick person, right? So invalid. He's a hypochondriac. Everything is wrong with him, and they let him know. Meanwhile, they're giving him sugar pills and water, and tell him this will make you feel better. But no, that's what I was saying about Molière and his satire. That sometimes got him in trouble. And that's a very modern thing, right? You look at Saturday Night Live, if you look at television these days, and that's what they're doing. That's what satire is. And the Commedia dell'arte did that. Molière did a lot with Commedia dell'arte. Spanish playwrights couldn't get away with some of that because they were very, very strict society where the moral code of ethics was all laid out for you, how you became a Spanish grandee. So and the way you treated women. There was a lot of politeness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the plays didn't have anything to do with that. With what Molière was doing, because again, when you are living under a very, very strict king or dictator or whatever, you can't poke fun at individuals. Molière didn't either because of Louis. He poked fun at doctors in general, lawyers in general, etc. So we even have that lawyer jokes. We don't say a person and make the joke a particular person. You can, but we live in a freer society. I'd like to keep it that way, by the way. So, all right, I think that I'm finished for now. I hope that the Renaissance, you see why I spent a lot of time on it and stretched it over the 2 weeks, and why I changed our writing about it in the syllabus, because I realized I'm not going to shove all this information at you in one night. So we had the 2 nights. And even these 2 things. What's the point of my reiterating what I wrote? I kind of like this idea of sort of just fleshing it out. So we'll do it again next week. So remember, next week, part 2 of the Renaissance, and then we're going to move ahead into the Enlightenment, right? The Age of Reason, where neoclassicism becomes the norm. So have a good week. You all did very well today, by the way, on the first part of the quiz. Look for the articles. All right? Take care. Have a good night. And see you next week.